In this video, I want to explain how the flipped classroom works in statics. Understanding this structure is critical because it changes where and how learning happens in this course. In the traditional university model, often called the sage on stage, we sit in a chair and you watch an instructor solve problems for the entire class period with some interaction, possibly asking questions. It looks straightforward when I do it. You take notes, you nod along, and it feels like you understand, but the real difficulty doesn't show up until later. In a flipped classroom, we invert the model. This doesn't mean that you are teaching yourself. It means that we've moved different parts of the learning process to the time and place where they are most effective. Let's start with what happens outside the class, because a lot of times students struggle with, what do I do when I'm outside of class? This is where the initial exposure of the material occurs, when you have the ability to pause, rewind, and work at your own pace. The flipped model is built around 4 phases. Phase 1 is the input. Phase 2 is the reps. Phase 3 is the work. And phase 4 is collaboration. Each phase has a specific purpose, and skipping one will hurt your performance later. Phase 1 is the input phase. This is where you watch the lecture videos, read the textbook, take notes. This is not mastery. This is just the exposure to the material and the vocabulary being used. Phase 2, the reps. This is where you begin solving problems, working through interactive exercises, creating your formula sheet. This is where the understanding starts to form, but is still in a very fragile stage. It has not been solidified. Phase 3 is the work. This involves you completing chapter homework assignments, pre-test question. This phase really reveals what you truly understand and where the gaps still exist. I find it very helpful that when you're doing this phase, that you remove all kinds of other props that you might use. You close the textbook, you don't look at the textbook, you don't look at your notes, you treat it as if it's a quiz or test. Phase 4 is collaboration. This involves working with your peers. This can be in the form of a group peer review. This means that you're not coming together to start problems, but maybe you've worked them to a certain point, or you worked them all the way through and you review each other's work, or you ask questions when you got stuck with your peers. It also involves attending the Friday work sessions and also the supplemental instructor sessions. Now, after all this has been completed, you are prepared for the class. And the class will have basically 5 different parts. The first part would be the daily kickoff. Okay, and this will look different from class to class. It could be about announcements. It could be addressing questions that were brought up before, or it could have been questions that were discussed on the course cafe. A lot of other sources where this could come from. It also might be an elaboration of some difficult concepts. Now, the next part is the core of the whole class itself. This is the work session. This can involve several different activities. It could be where we just put a problem up on the board and we work it, and then we switch papers and everyone looks at it. This involves me walking around, looking at work. You don't necessarily have to raise your hand. I can just come in and look at your work and maybe check it out and give you some hints or nudges. Okay. The spot check is similar. It can work a couple different ways. It could be where we have someone come up and work on the board and we work through it together. It could involve me putting up a problem that appears to be solved, and I want you to try to find the error. Okay, that's one way. And the last part is test rehearsal. This involves typically the last class before a test. And in it, I'm going to give you a couple test questions from previous tests, and we'll work it just like a test. You know, you'll clear your desk, you'll put away your phone, you'll put everything away except for everything you need to do the test. We'll work it problem by problem. So we'll work the first problem under a time condition. You'll still have plenty of time to do it. We'll stop it, and then I'll post the solution, and then you will check your own work, and you will grade your own work, and then we'll move on to another problem. Typically, I can't cover the same number of problems, but we can hit all the highlights for a test. And this usually proves to be very valuable.